An entitled neighbor uses my property without my permission and even goes as far as to ban me from doing certain things on my own yard. But after he yelled at my kid and tried to say terrible things about my wife, I decided to get some revenge by getting a surveyor to describe exactly where my property begins and his ends, resulting in this guy being proven wrong in a way that he absolutely deserved. Here's what happened. So a few years ago, I lived in a subdivision that was full of entitled old people. In the 4 years that we lived there, I would take my girls on walks, and there were 2 other families in the entire subdivision with kids, and the rest were all retirees or angry old people that still needed to work. When the kids would ride their bikes in the road, we'd get yelled at for being in the road, but when they rode on the sidewalks, they'd get yelled at for being on the sidewalk. If they picked up a dandelion from a yard, we would then get yelled at for messing up their landscaping. I mean, everyone around here was so entitled. So my neighbor was an old retired army man who did whatever he wanted, and apparently nobody ever said no to him. He didn't like the trash pickup because it would damage his lawn, so he would just put his carts on my property. He would also get political signs and put them in my property. His fence was too short on the side of his house to have a gate, so we had one on the side facing my property, and he would just straight up take everything through my yard, including his 4-wheelers and his lawnmower. And I'm personally of the opinion that a yard is just a yard, so I didn't really care. But I had my trees maintained professionally, I had lawn care, and I kept my yard mowed. And generally speaking, I didn't pay much attention to his complaints other than to say, okay, I'll keep an eye on that. Now, you see, my wife has absolutely no spatial awareness, and she is a terrible parker. She's the type that pulls forward into a parallel spot and leaves the tail sitting halfway out on the edge of oncoming traffic and thinks that that's okay. The type that pulls into a spot and somehow gets wheels on every line. She's the type that would pull in and out of our driveway that is wide enough for 3 cars, but still find a way to take one wheel through the grass, resulting in a ground up mud spot right at the bottom of the driveway where it meets the sidewalk. And this really was it. This was the most terrible thing that my entitled neighbor could even imagine happening. One day in mid-November, I got home from picking up the kids from school, and my oldest, who was 7 years old at the time, hops out and saw him putting up one of those electric trees in the front yard for Christmas time. His wife was super sweet, and she wanted it, so he would do it, even though he hated doing anything remotely joyful. My daughter, who was standing on my driveway because I told her not to approach them unless they used the sidewalk, told him how she loves the lights when they put them up. Well, when she said that, he immediately rages at her and then comes up to me on my driveway with my arms full and tells me that he won't be having any more of that mud, that it's making his yard into a mud pit, and that women shouldn't drive anyways. And if I won't fix my wife's driving, that he'll just get a truckload of rocks and dump them on my driveway so we won't use it anymore. Now, I'm already livid at him yelling at my child, but I happen to have had enough of his complaining a couple of months ago and decided to get an official survey, so I tell him to stay right there and that we'll talk in just a minute. So I take the girls inside, I get the extra copy of the survey I had for this very occasion, and I take it outside and I hand it straight to him. I then explain how he can feel free to dump as much rocks as he wants on his own property, but then I take a few steps forward onto the lawn and I show him exactly where the line ends. I then tell him if he takes one step over the line from now on, I will have him trespassed. I then point out that his gate butts up against the actual property line, so he cannot use it any longer, and that my driveway is mine and that he can't use that either, and that if his trash bins end up on my yard again, I will call the city and have them removed, and he can go down and get new ones. Now, by this point, he is beet red and tells me that I can't tell him what to do with his gate, while also questioning me how he's supposed to mow the lawn or get his 4-wheelers out. But I just shrug and I tell him, try me. And that was the last time we ever spoke. About a year later, some guys came out to do some work on his house, and they were going up my driveway, and I told them, no, you have to use his property, and then I gave them the history. I could tell they were annoyed at me for making their life harder, but they ended up having to drive their stupid lifter through his lawn and ground up all of his grass going up and down that hill multiple times. And honestly, it felt so good watching his lawn become a mud pit. We moved just a couple of months later, and while now it does feel a little bit petty, before we left, I left a card at his house that said we appreciated how kind his wife was and hoped his new neighbors would treat him with as much care and respect as he had afforded us. And I'm honestly so glad to be away from this guy because he was an absolute nightmare to live by. Wow, this guy's a massive jerk. For starters, why are you yelling at somebody's kid? Like, this kid was not doing anything wrong. They were standing on their property being like, oh, I'm so glad you're putting lights up for Christmas. Like, is that really an occasion to start screaming at this kid? And then acting as if the wife in this story is somehow making the lawn a mud pit. And oh, by the way, that lawn isn't even yours. So good for you for getting back at this guy because the way he treated you was completely inappropriate. If If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My grandmother is very upset with me that we don't share personal information with her any longer, all because she posts everything anyone ever says to her all over her Facebook page. Here's what happened. So my grandmother and I used to be extremely close. However, since I became a parent 9 years ago, our relationship has been strained. My firstborn was born 6.5 weeks premature, which resulted in a lengthy hospital stay for him. My wife also contracted some type of infection and had to spend a few days isolated from our son while also on IV antibiotics. We only notified our parents and employers of what was going on, as this was a scary time for us. My mom asked if she could tell anyone what was going on, and I gave her permission to tell my uncle, my brother, and my grandparents, but said that I wanted it kept within the family and not publicly shared. And my wife told her parents basically the same thing. As soon as our son was born, he was rushed to an ICU. Neither my wife or I got to hold him, I wasn't able to cut the cord, and only had enough time to take a picture on my phone while the team of doctors and nurses were working on him and taking him away. As I sat trying to comfort my wife, we both started getting several text messages, which was odd as we don't typically have many text conversations. We looked and we had a mix of messages offering congratulations and prayers for us and our son. At this point, I had not even gotten to touch my son or even know if he was okay. My wife replied to one of her close friends and asked how she knew about the news, to which she replied that my grandmother had posted on Facebook that we were in need of prayers. So I opened the application on my phone and I saw that my grandma had made a post with my wife and I both tagged, saying that our son arrived early, was in critical condition, and that my wife wasn't doing well, and that we needed all the prayers that we could get. Well, I immediately called my mom, and I not so nicely told her that she was in charge of getting grandma to take the post down, and that she was not to share any further information with her from here on out. Well, fast forward to now, and I rarely call grandma to tell her anything. I've shared a few life events on Facebook, and she comments that she wishes she could hear from me instead of reading it online, which is incredibly ironic if you think about it. When she comes to visit us, she always says it's like she doesn't know us anymore and never gets updates on any of our lives outside of the occasional Facebook post. Meanwhile, her profile is full of posts about other family members and what's going on in their lives. I've told her that my personal life is just that, and I will not be sharing any of it with her that I wouldn't share with the world. Yeah, I do not blame you for cutting your grandma out of your life in that way, because clearly nothing's private with her, and she's just gonna share it on Facebook at the drop of a hat. So I personally find that incredibly annoying, and I don't blame you for withholding any kind of private information. Am I the jerk for turning a family argument into a massive situation after I decided to speak up? Because right now my mother's blaming me for everything going wrong, and at this point I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. I'm a 20-year-old male and I come from an absolute nightmare of a family. One of my uncles is a raging narcissist, but everyone still talks to him unfortunately, and for the sake of the story we'll call him Frank. Yesterday we had a small family dinner since it is my grandmother's birthday. Frank and his wife, who we will call Sarah, are completely awful to Frank's daughter from his first marriage. We'll call this daughter Clara. I would never stop to explain it all, but all you need to know is that Clara is completely innocent. They literally hate her for no reason. Frank hosted a family dinner yesterday, and they were trying to use Clara as a servant. She had already cooked most of the food, and they were trying to make her clean up as well. Eventually, she had enough and called her stepbrother to collect her. I've met her stepbrother a few times, and he's a very nice guy, but he does not mess around about his sisters, and that includes Clara. He used to have major anger issues, but he's much calmer nowadays. Her stepbrother arrived, and Frank said that he wasn't going to let Clara leave until she washed all the dishes. Other cousins offered to help out, but he said that since she made all the dishes because she did all the cooking, she had to wash them herself. He then hid her shoes and phone so that she couldn't leave. And for the first time ever, my mother and other elders in the family were standing up to him, and they were demanding that he let her go home, but he literally was not budging. An argument started after all the kids were cleared out of the room, and Clara started crying, and she was going to go back to doing the dishes, but I was like, no, that is not going to happen. I went outside to her stepbrother's car, and it turns out that one of Clara's cousins from her mom's side was also there with him. They asked what was taking so long, and I informed them of the situation. And this is where I might be the jerk, since I knew these two would go into the house and get Clara out by any means necessary. So I let them in, and all I can say is that Clara's shoes and phone were returned almost immediately. I stayed outside, and I am not lying when I say that those men shouted so loudly that the windows were literally shaking. Her stepbrother and cousin also then took a pair of of Frank's shoes, the TV remote, and a few other things just because they could. Well, now that the dust is settled, everybody is mad at me. My mom is saying that I was a jerk because they were trying to get the situation sorted out, which is true because that was the first time I saw anyone stand up to Frank. She said now that I got Clara's maternal family involved, things are a million times worse. Clara's older brother, who is not the stepbrother, but who's also Frank's son who couldn't make it to the family dinner, has now completely disowned his father and is now refusing to return a car and a lawnmower that he borrowed. They're now demanding that I apologize to Frank and that I also ensure his belongings are returned to him. But I do not think that I'm the jerk because it is his own fault that he refused to let Clara go. So seriously, am I the jerk in this situation? What should I do? No, you are definitely not the jerk. Getting Clara's family involved in that way was the best move you could have made. Everybody else has clearly been coddling Frank and like dancing around the way he acts, and it really seems like they're only mad that you said anything because now they can't hide the fact that Frank is an awful person. Like seriously, who is your mom to be like, wow, everything's so bad because you said something. It's a million times worse because you spoke up. But it's like, wait a second, lady, why have you never spoken up? Does she not even care about Clara and the way that she gets treated? Because it sounds like she's been more than willing to sit on the sidelines and let all of this happen. But now that you've basically brought this all to light, somehow it's your fault? No, it's not your fault. It's your mom's fault and everybody else who stayed quiet. And let me tell you something, if they really tried to look at me and say, you need to apologize to Frank and get his belongings back, I would laugh so hard in their face, I would probably start crying. Because there is no way you ever owe Frank an apology. This guy is a narcissist, he's a piece of garbage, and I'm sure this guy finds so much pleasure in all the chaos he causes in your family. So no, not only are you not the jerk in this scenario, but under no circumstances do I ever think that you should ever have to apologize to Frank. Am I the jerk for telling my father to get over the vase that my son accidentally broke? Because right now he is making a bigger deal out of this than it really needs to be. And after a bit of back and forth between the two of us, he now thinks that I'm the one in the wrong, despite the fact that my husband and I offered multiple times to try and make things right. Here's what happened. Okay, so when I was a teenager, my father bought a large glass vase, which he filled with wine corks. And for years, it stayed on top of a small table in the living room. My family visits him monthly for lunch, and last October, my son was running around my father's living room and accidentally knocked the table over, which caused the vase to fall down and break. I immediately apologized and offered to buy a new vase. My husband and I also cleaned everything up. My father declined my offer to replace it, and at the time, he said he understood it was an accident and was glad my son hadn't gotten hurt. Mind you, he was 2 years old at the time, and there was a lot of glass on the floor. During the next couple of months, I apologized and offered to pay for a new vase multiple times, but my father kept saying that it was fine. However, earlier this year, my father started talking about how much he loved the cork vase and how expensive it had been back when he bought it. And as the following months went by, his complaints began to escalate. He would make comments about the fact that my son broke the vase almost every single time we came over. Occasionally, he would also supposedly joke that we should plan our visits with longer notice so that he could hide his valuables from my kid. Last week, he threw a party at his place, which we attended, and a friend of his who had not visited in a while noticed that the vase was gone and asked about it, to which my father replied that my little jerk of a son had broken it and that I had not replaced it. Now, my husband was nearby and he's the one that heard it, so after the party, I confronted my father and we fought. He said that he had the right to complain about the fact that my son had damaged his property, but I told him that while he has the right to be upset, the fact that he declined my offer to buy him a new vase does not entitle him to complain about me not doing it. He can either retract his forgiveness and work something out with me, or get over the vase and stop blaming my toddler for the accident. Oh, and for the record, he didn't call my son a little jerk, but instead used a swear word to describe my son. So I told him that I won't have him calling my son bad names over this kind of incident. My father is still insisting that I'm in the wrong here, so I'm honestly feeling so frustrated because right now I really don't know what to do. No, you are not in the wrong for calling him out. He clearly feels a certain kind of way about that stupid vase, and he's trying to like retroactively blame this on your son, despite the fact that you literally tried to fix the situation. You quite literally offered to replace the vase and pay for it, but he declined both times. So I think you're totally in the right for being like, wait a second, you can pick one of these two options. Either you can be upset and we can figure this out, or you can let it go and be an adult. So for him to double back and be like, yeah, they didn't even replace the vase that their stupid kid broke, like that is a straight up lie, and that would drive me personally incredibly insane. So no, I do not think that you did anything wrong for correcting this guy, because your dad's behavior is completely unacceptable. An entitled Karen freaks out when she hears me do doing my yard work, demanding that I turn off my leaf blower as she tried to lie to me that I was breaking the law for using it in the first place. Here's what happened. So every Sunday afternoon, I do yard work. I mow the lawn and use the weed whacker to take care of some overgrowth, and when I clean up, I use an electric leaf blower, and I'm typically wrapped up in less than an hour. Well, this last Sunday, I'm using the leaf blower to clean up my backyard when I look up and I see my neighbor standing in my yard waving at me. I walk over to where she is, and she is yelling for me to stop. My neighbor is this Karen white woman who absolutely never talks to me. I've been living next door to her for 10 years, and I don't even know her name. When I see her outside, I do attempt to be neighborly and wave, but whenever she sees me, she looks down and walks away. The only other time over the course of the last 10 years that we've ever interacted was when I was talking on the phone outside, and she popped her head out of the window and demanded that I take my call somewhere else and that she couldn't hear herself think. So needless to say, we haven't had the most neighborly relationship ever. So anyways, I walked up to her with the electric leaf blower in my hand, and she says to me, "You need to stop it. It's illegal to use a leaf blower. Also, be considerate of your neighbors. I'm trying to relax on my back porch, but I can't do that because you're making so much noise with this machine. You do know it's against city noise ordinances, right? You're breaking the law." Now, when she said this, I didn't say anything. And while I was standing in front of her, I pulled out my phone and Googled the noise ordinances in my city, which I found and read very quickly. I then told her the following. Well, according to the noise ordinances in our city, gas-powered leaf blowers are illegal, but this one's an electric one. Also, I'm perfectly within my right to use these sorts of tools during the weekend between the hours of 9 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. So no, you are definitely wrong. I'm not doing anything illegal, but you, however, are trespassing. Her face at this point turned red, and her mouth hung open for a couple of seconds before she began to sputter out some kind of response. She said to me, "That must be wrong. I petitioned. You have to be wrong." I said to her, "No, it's right here in our city's noise ordinance page," and it took me all of 10 seconds to find it. And at that point, I showed her my phone. Well, she just ignored my phone, and then she asked me, "Okay, well, why can't you use a broom? We use a broom, no problem." I respond by saying, "Because it's a lot to sweep up, and I don't want to be here all afternoon. Besides, you have a gardener, and he uses a leaf blower too." She then tried to switch tactics. She said to me, "I'm just trying to be neighborly. I came and I asked you nicely." But when she said that, I cut her off. I said to her, "No, you didn't ask nicely. You came into my backyard uninvited, you started yelling at me, then you tried to tell me what to do on my own property, and then you lied about noise ordinances just to get what you wanted. That is not being neighborly." She started backing out of my backyard, throwing her hands in the air in frustration. "But it's so loud, and I'm just trying to relax. Why can't you be more considerate of your neighbors?" I replied by saying, "You're not being considerate either, lady. You could have asked how much longer I was planning on using the machine, because it's not as if I'm planning to use the leaf blower for several hours. But you didn't. You demanded that I stop. You're making your feeling inconvenience my problem. I don't mean to be a jerk, but if you don't want to hear the leaf blowers for another 10 minutes or so while I finish up my yard work, go inside your house and close your doors and windows, because this is definitely a you problem." She then turned away and walked back into her backyard. I kept using the leaf blower, and I heard her slam her backyard door. Well, true to my word, I was done in less than 10 minutes. But regardless, she didn't emerge from the inside of her house for the rest of the day. Wow, that sounds incredibly obnoxious to deal with, because seriously, what is that lady's problem? For starters, she absolutely came over there to try and have an argument. She tried to be like, "Oh yeah, you're breaking the law." And when that didn't work, she tried to switch up tactics and be like, "Oh, I'm just trying to be a good neighbor." But it's like, seriously, what are you talking about? Why are you ignorantly forgetting the entire beginning of this conversation? Because this Karen's behavior, in my opinion, was completely inappropriate. And if she had just been a little bit nicer, then literally all of this could have been solved in a reasonable way. Am I the jerk for kicking my boyfriend's family out of my house and refusing to let them move back in after finding out his brother has cancer? Here's what happened. I'm a 32-year-old female, and I managed to buy a house in 2020 with my savings from working as a nurse when home prices and interest rates were so low. About 2 years ago, my boyfriend's mom, his ex-convict brother, his brother's wife, and their 2 kids moved in with me. Initially, things were okay, but problems really started when I began working night shifts 6 months ago. Every time I came home, the house was a complete mess. There were dirty dishes, trash everywhere, and it was all just completely neglected. It became increasingly stressful to return after such a long shift to then come into such chaos. To add on to that, they were super loud during the day, so I couldn't get any rest from my following shift. So it was just too many people for a small 2-bedroom home. Despite having numerous conversations about cleaning up after themselves, nothing really changed. On top of that, I feel like my hospitality hospitality was being taken advantage of. They didn't contribute financially, and I started feeling like a free hotel. I finally reached my limit and told them they needed to find another place to live. Well, my boyfriend is upset, saying I should be more understanding, especially since his brother recently found out that he has stomach cancer after I forced him out, and now he has no way of getting to his doctor's appointments. Even though his brother doesn't contribute, my boyfriend pays for around half of the bills. The house is solely under my name, and he didn't contribute a thing to the down payment. But despite this, he feels that I'm being too harsh. So honestly, I really need to know, am I the jerk for kicking them out, especially for the way they treated my home? What should I do? No, I do not think you're the jerk at all, because seriously, the way they treated your house is unacceptable. They didn't even try to take care of your house. Everything was a massive mess, and they didn't even care to try and clean up and take care of the place. Like, the level of disrespect they were showing you would have gotten under my skin as well if I was in your shoes. And for your boyfriend to be like, oh, come on, my brother has stomach cancer. What is he gonna do now? It almost sounds like he's trying to blame you for his brother having cancer. Like, wait a second, that's not fair in the slightest. You didn't cause that, and that's definitely not your fault. So no, I don't blame you for kicking them out, because the way they were treating your home was completely unacceptable, and if I was in your shoes, I would have done the exact same thing. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.